Hi, Himeutsugi here, and welcome to the first video in my new series for beginners to solo tabletop RPGs. In this video, I'm going to be talking about what even is a solo TTRPG, how they're played, and the different types that exist. A solo TTRPG is a tabletop role-playing game that you play by yourself. Now, you may know this, but traditionally, a TTRPG is played with a group. You have one person who is the DM. Sometimes they're called different things, depending on the game rule set, but usually DM, Dungeon Master, or a GM for Game Master, the most common, and they create the world. They inhabit all of the different non-playable characters or NPCs that you might meet throughout your journey, and they answer questions that the players have. And there's typically multiple players, with each of them role-playing as a character in this group, going on this adventure together. However, not everyone knows other people that play TTRPGs to make a group, or maybe you have a group where nobody wants to be the DM. They don't want to have to prepare all of that stuff. And so that's where solo TTRPGs really shine, because you don't need a DM to be able to play. So where traditionally, let's say that your character is walking into a room, the DM would be explaining what the room looks like. Okay, you walk into this dusty attic, there's a chair to your left, and there looks to be a locked treasure chest on the right side, etc., etc. And then you might ask the questions like, okay, what kind of lock is it? Can I check to see if anyone has been here in a while? As the player, you would be asking the DM, and they would make some sort of judgment call or have you roll for it. When you're playing solo, instead of having a DM to mediate these decisions, you get to make them for yourself. Of course, you don't do this unassisted, and that's where the Oracle and Spark tables come to play. So instead of asking a DM, can I pick this lock? You might roll on an Oracle table, and you roll an 8, and the 8 says, the lock is unpickable. Or you might roll a 2 and it says, okay, the lock is pickable, you just have to pass a certain check or something or other. You can also use oracles to answer yes-no questions. This is what I see most commonly. And depending on the odds or the likelihood, you can change the probability of your yes or no question being a certain answer. So let's say you come across a camp in the woods and you want to know, is this camp inhabited? And you can make a judgment call on, okay, how likely is that? Okay, well, you're in a wood, you've passed 5 different people already this morning, so it's fairly likely that it will be inhabited. And so in that case, you'll roll a d20, and a 50-50 chance would be like, okay, 1 through 10 is yes, and 11 through 20 is no. But then if it's more likely, you might have something like, oh, 1 through 16 is yes, and only 17 through 20 is no. There are many systems that I will talk about in later videos that help guide you through those numbers and those probabilities. And oftentimes games already have included oracle tables to help you through this kind of math and probability. But that's basically how it works. So instead of relying on a DM to tell you, you roll on a table, which tells you instead, and then you can interpret those results and add that into your story. And that's the main difference between playing a solo TTRPG versus playing a group TTRPG, is you are the sole decision maker. You are the sole arbiter of rules, and you are the person rolling. So in a sense, you are the DM and the player at the same time. Now, this is where I want to get into the different types of solo TTRPGs. These are not official by any means. This is just in my time playing solo TTRPGs. This is the breakdown that makes the most sense to me. So these games are full narrative. It almost feels like a creative writing exercise with some extra rules, right? But the most typical journaling solo TTRPGs are games where you get prompts. Now, this is the part that is the element of chance. Some of them have you rolling for prompts, so using a dice. And so let's say you go and there's a table with 100 entries in it. And so you roll a d100, and depending on what result you get, that tells you the prompt. Like, okay, now you're going into the woods. Oh, you get a different roll. Oh, well, now you've come across a haunted mansion, and the guy that you met a couple rooms ago is lurking around the corner. Who knows? They can be very vague or very specific. Some of them use cards instead to explore. And so depending on what card from a standard deck of cards you pull, it might be a different result. Some of them use tarot cards and various other means of progressing through these prompts. But basically these games follow a format of you get a prompt, you respond or react to the prompt typically through journaling or writing, and then you move on to the next one. So I'm going to talk about a few examples of journaling solo TTRPGs. The first one is called The Hourglass Sings, and this is a game that I have covered and played before on my channel. Really, the main part of the game is that you are drawing cards that give you prompts, and then you respond to those prompts. There is some gameplay aspect in the sense that there are 3 points of view. You have the town, you have the hero, and then you have the dark, which is sort of like the villain or rival character. And you're switching POVs, but still for each POV, you are drawing a card and getting a prompt that you must respond to. And then once you run out of cards or once the story reaches its natural conclusion, then the game is over. But the key point here is that the main gameplay is journaling, is responding to the prompts. Another great example of this genre is Last Tea Shop, which is a game about tea and conversation. So you are sort of setting up a stall and visitors come out that you chat with and prepare tea for. Now, there is a little bit of extra gameplay in the sense that there's different tea you can make, there's different types of tables, but ultimately all of those tables are just to help you with the prompt. There's different types of patrons and visitors that can come visit your tea shop, all of those different things, but ultimately those are just meant to help flesh out the prompts in the first place. There's no extra things, like you are not rolling to check to see how good your tea making skills are or anything like that. At its heart, again, this is a game about the narrative, about the story of The Last Tea Shop. And then my final example that I have is 1,000-Year-Old Vampire, which is actually how I personally got into solo TTRPGs. And this is a game that I think compared to the last two examples, it does have a little bit more gameplay. You do keep track of items, so you kind of have a character sheet in a way. You keep track of items, you keep track of your vampire's memories. However, again, I feel that all of those things are just to help you along with the prompts. And ultimately, the core gameplay loop is you rolling a die to tell you how far along the prompts you proceed, and then where you land on is, okay, that's the prompt that you're responding to. And ultimately, the list of memories and the list of items are just to help you with those prompts. And so again, this is a very narrative-heavy story. In fact, I don't think you can play this game really without at least jotting down some notes. And so journaling is really heavy, is really the main point of the game, and I think the same can be said of the other two examples as well. So these are the games that have a lot more, I don't want to say intense, but they can be intense rule sets. And so this is not to say that there is no story involved, there is no narrative involved, because there is. There's definitely a story, there's world building, you are in a place, you are role-playing as a character. However, when playing these, it feels a little bit more board game-like in that there are rules, there's combat, there's exploration, there's things you're doing to progress the story that don't rely on a prompt. You still have oracle tables telling you, okay, you go to this room, and what type of room is it? Okay. But it is less heavily focused on the narrative itself. Rather, there is gameplay, and then you may have narrative that emerges as a result of those decisions, right? So a couple of examples. First, we have Caernathalis, and so this is the ultimate sort of dungeon diving sort of game, and so your character gets plonked down into this underground dungeon that you are, ostensibly you are trying to escape the dungeon. I don't know that you ever really do, but there's a lot of combat, there's exploration, you have to do checks to see, okay, can you get through this trap? Can you get past this locked door? And so while there is narrative, you have a character, they have a backstory, there's a reason why they're there, and there's a reason why they are trying to get out. There's so many rules that the core gameplay loop is more about those rules and not so much journaling. Another example is Iron Valley. It uses the Ironsworn rule set, but it is adapted to be more of a farming, survival, Stardew Valley kind of experience. And this is another one that has a lot of gameplay mechanics. You are rolling these checks to see how well you do at perhaps talking to this person or trying to cook and getting these different skills. There's a very extensive character sheet that you keep track of. So while there's definitely journaling involved, it is not part of the core gameplay. It just comes as a result. So after you do all of these gameplay things, you can then, okay, now I stop and I'm going to journal my experience. So I'm interpreting the results of all these different checks and all of these different things that I chose to have my character do, and this is what actually happened, right? But that part is for flavor. It's not dictated by prompts in the same way that they are in journaling games. And finally, an example is Rune, which is sort of a Souls-like game as a solo TTRPG. And again, very heavily based on the gameplay aspect of, okay, you're exploring, you're fighting these different enemies and monsters, and there's definitely lore, there's definitely story, but even in this sense, a lot of it is already pre-built. And so when you go to a place, there's already an entry in the book telling you, oh, this is where this rock came from, this was placed here in this time, and it has this meaning. Now you can flesh that out further, surely, and there's oracles you can use to do that, but I think that the core gameplay loop is not about journaling, and that's what differentiates the games in this category for me, is that it's more gameplay focused than narrative focused. Again, I don't think that means that there's no narrative, just that that isn't the focus of the game. That does not mean that I think that they're perfectly balanced, but I call them balanced because you can't put them squarely in the journaling category or the crunchy category, but it's sort of a marriage of both of those things in, some are a little bit more one than the other, but still, there is a mix of journaling that is required and gameplay that is also required, right? So an example of that is Koriko, where at first you might think, no, this is another journaling game. You're writing a lot. There's not a character sheet. However, there are mechanics. You have to stack your dice, and if the dice tower falls over, then something happens to you, right? You have to write letters throughout the story. So not just your journaling, but okay, you are in character writing a letter to another character, right? So it's not pure journaling, but it does have a little bit. It's not enough crunch to be what I would consider a crunchy game, but it does have some other gameplay aspects. Another example is Bramble Trek. So it is a game where you play as a little mouse on a journey. And again, there is a lot of journaling. You draw cards to tell you different prompts. Like, okay, so you got the 3 of diamonds, which means that you've encountered this, and then you have to respond to that and journal it, right? However, there is a battle system. And so when you fight monsters, you have to pull cards and you have different skills that you can use in battle. And so you can't say that it's purely a journaling game because there are gameplay mechanics. You do have a character sheet, you pick up items, you have health, all of those traditional RPG things. And then finally, I have Colossal. It even has sheets for journaling specifically, but there's a lot of gameplay. There's exploration, you have cards that can be items, there's a battle system. So again, in the same vein as Bramble Trek, although I think that this one is a little bit more crunchy compared to Bramble Trek, Colossal has other rules than simply journaling, and that's what makes it kind of go into this category for me. Personally, I don't prefer any one type to the other, and in fact, there are times that I'm really in the mood for a journaling game where I just write for hours, and other times I'm in the mood for a crunchy game where I don't really have to work too hard on my character's backstory. I just roll the dice and watch the numbers go up and down, and that can be a lot of fun too. But I think as a beginner solo TTRPG player, it's important for you to figure out which of these 3 experiences you are most interested in, because if you want a crunchy experience, then Last Tea Shop is not going to do that for you, right? But likewise, if you want a very narrative-heavy game where you are creating a character with an extensive backstory and you're meeting a lot of NPCs and really building this personal adventure, then unfortunately Cair Nathalis is not going to do it for you, right? You're hardly going to meet anyone in that game at all, except for enemies trying to kill you. And so I believe that the most important thing is to be informed and seek out the correct type of game for your tastes. Because otherwise, if you try a game that's not aligned to what you actually want to play, you're going to have a bad time, and I don't want you to write off the entire genre of solo TTRPGs just based on one experience, right? And if you're not sure what experience you want to have, I highly recommend trying out at least one of each of the types that I just described. And you might surprise yourself. Maybe you never thought of yourself as a creative writer, but then you just really love journaling games, right? And so if you're not sure, or you're sort of at a crossroads, then definitely try out some of the ones that I've suggested and see if any of them float your boat. For future videos in this series, I will be doing deeper dives into each of those 3 game types and giving more recommendations and going a little bit more in depth into what makes them tick. And so if you would like more recommendations, just stay tuned, there'll be more of those. And then in between those, I will have other videos as well that focus more on playing solo TTRPGs as a whole. So in the next video, we will actually be talking about balanced game recommendations. And then after that one, the next up on deck is one about how to handle NPCs. How can you play your player character as well as other characters without getting overwhelmed or feel like you're railroading yourself all the time. And so I hope you look forward to those. And if you're new to Solo TTRPGs, welcome. We're really happy to have you here in this little community, and I hope to see you around. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.